All right, guys, we are back at the Pat Stedman podcast, and we are back with Trina Nuance.
Yo,
We had a phenomenal one last time. That was, I believe, episode 2. And now we're on episode 6. How time flies. So today we are going to be talking about sex. And so I want these view counts. I want these likes. I want shit like up the roof. If we can't get a big audience talking about sex, then we just totally we're flaccid. We fucked it up. So we got a good list of topics here, Trina. I want to talk about the first one here, though. What does sex reveal about the story or dynamic between two people? And I want to dig into a little bit about what you mean with that question. But I'm also kind of curious. Can you tell what somebody's relationship is like based on their sex life? Like, how does a sexual relationship mirror the rest of the relationship? So let's talk about that. What is it? What does sex tell us about the story dynamic between two people?
At some point, I saw something, whether it was specifically saying this or something to this effect, about sex being the real, something about revealing the real thing happening between two people. So that I didn't originate that idea. And ever since, and it was a while ago, and it stayed with me. And if I reflect at my sexual experiences and secondhand stories of other people's sexual experiences, it's just so true. I think that, say for example, a couple is going through a tumultuous time. I think that shows up in the bedroom. Or say that two people are just hooking up. And I think that also shows up in the bedroom, because there's a couple things happening here, right? And I think there's so many parallels to this with the controversy of like a sexual being as just a human, whether it's a man or a woman, and these negative things about just being a sexual creature, which we all are as humans. And I think that those two elements come into play, because say for example, a pair of people don't have real intimacy. There's, they don't have a real underpinning like bond or openness with each other or understanding with each other. I think that can show up, and that might look like, maybe they do have really good sex, but you can tell in terms of the way that dance is happening in the bedroom that it's just the primal carnal element of their energies interplaying, and that just satisfaction and lust sort of thing, right? And I think that in situations where they do have that intimacy, or they have a longer term relationship and that is going through a bad time, I think it also shows up, right? Whether it's a hookup scenario or a long-term relationship where they're going through something tumultuous, but still having good sex, it becomes this just, this is just primal, feeling good, getting my needs, pleasure-centered, right? Whereas I think whether it's in a non-committed relationship, short-term relationship, or a long-term relationship, and everything is really vibing and that intimacy is there and they're really understanding and resonating with each other, that shows up in how that dance happens. So I think it can reveal a lot of things, right? One of the physical manifestations of it, I think, is like eye contact and like flow, right? Are you switching positions, or navigating the experience with some flow to it? Are you looking each other in the face? Are you vibing? It sounds so silly, but I think it can reveal a lot. Just like when that's absent, maybe you don't have that connection, and it's just almost like, I'm going to be a little explicit here, in a hookup scenario, which I've experienced. You can feel that there's not an element. It's almost like two people using each other's bodies to masturbate.
Yeah.
There's no connection. There's no intimacy. There's no real flow, right? So I'm yapping now, but what do you think about that?
Well, one of the things that came to mind when you were saying that I thought was really interesting is you have some relationships. So typically, when a relationship is collapsing, the sex goes down, typically.
Yeah.
But there are some relationships where things that, like, they're having bad issues, they're going separate directions, but they're still like fucking regularly. And I've always found that kind of interesting because I haven't personally experienced that, right? Um, so I've always found it kind of interesting because I can see the dynamic with it, especially from what you were saying that, obviously sex drive plays a role in here, but if the two individuals, like if their way of sort of coping, if both of their ways of coping with like negative feelings is getting like a sexual release, then they could very easily, especially if they have like a good, let's say sexual chemistry, they might default to that out of some degree of comfort, even if the sex isn't deep. I think that's one of the, I think that's one of like the nuances when it comes to sex, is that the difference between like sexual chemistry and sexual depth between two individuals, because there can kind of just be like a primal sort of, understanding between two people where everything kind of goes and sinks, and it's just like you sort of know what to do with the other person. But that can be really great, but it's not necessarily deep. And so this is really interesting to think about, and especially like another thing that you mentioned, and I found this to be completely true too, and I've actually found at this point in my career, what fascinates me the most is sex. I think, for better or for worse, earlier in my, I almost feel like I tried to like focus on everything but it. Like, it's not that I ignored its existence, obviously, but like when I talk about like content or like things that do, with a woman outside of like technique related stuff, like there was a lot of it was just talking about like game, you know what I mean? And social dynamics. And I've just come to find as time goes on that so much of what goes on sexually between a couple, like it's just reflected.
Yeah.
It's reflected in the rest of the relationship. And if you can get the sexual connection strong, it then it tends to create like it tends to be reflective, if it's a feedback mechanism to the rest of the relationship. Um
A big analogy there is because you just made a kind of parallel between like, oh, game, but the kind of drawing a connection between those two is like, think about as a guy, right? You can think of a woman example that she's hot, but you wouldn't call her beautiful.
yeah.
And you can also think of an idea of a woman, you can call her beautiful, but you wouldn't necessarily call her hot. So, and I'm drawing that analogy because I think that's similar to sex, right? In the version of the beautiful, it's like, oh, you're making love. And the version of where it's you're just fucking, it's just hot, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's like the three categories that, and I'm sure women have their own version for men too. Maybe it's the same actually, but there's a sort of three categories of attractive, just like hot kind of blurs with it, but it's like sexy, cute, and beautiful, right? So like beautiful is literally just like physically attractive. Whereas I think cute tends to have more like comfort aspects of attraction with it. Like she's like there's like a bubbly, like, kind of like innocent kind of aspect to it. Like you're like men are drawn to it, but they're drawn to it for like the comfort aspects of femininity. And then there's sexy hot, right? Which is no, it's like the desire, it's the sexual energy. It's the way she carries herself, the way she moves. So
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. And I also think, when you look at game, like game is it okay, you're presenting yourself in this attractive manner, and it's this sort of courtship dance. But I feel like as you get deeper and deeper down, like sex is where so much of the real stuff gets revealed. And so it's like the substrate. Like you can kind of get through so much different stuff with game, but if like the sex stuff is off, it's like there's almost like a layer of poser that goes for the entire rest of it. And
Yeah.
you know, it's so revealing. It's so revealing about like where your actual confidence is, like
Yes.
who you actually are. Um, and it's one of those things that like I've realized over time elements in sex where I was like, oh wait, like I actually, you know, I could have been like more confident here. Like I didn't know that. Like I didn't know that I was deficient in this area. And then in other aspects, I realized that I probably did a lot better with women in certain ways because I did know what I was doing in the bedroom and I didn't assign enough value to that
Hmm.
in terms of why things worked out. Like there are things that as I've looked back in time, because I got like fucked up by the pickup marketing.
I think
Like
that's a rite of passage when you're
no,
like
no,
getting
but this
ready
is
to go.
no, but Trina, like this is crazy. This is like a crazy thing because the pickup marketing was so good. It was so good. It was so good at persuading me as a young man that what you needed was game in order to get girls, that like I didn't associate much value in looks. I didn't associate much value in you know, very these like and even in sex, right? It was all like game, game. And it's like I look back and I realize, you know, is it because I knew what I was doing down there and because I was 6 foot tall? Did that give me like was my game not that good? Like was my game
No, it's not.
I'm like maybe my game wasn't that good. Like I don't know.
So I
I,
think that you are describing like you kind of compartmentalize these things that were in hindsight, which is always 2020, are related, right? If you
yeah,
can feel valid because your ability to game and like, somebody's like having a good time and like you're building attraction in that social dynamic and you're not even paying attention to how that's related to the real conversation happening between you, then, that's just your focus is there because that's where the validation is happening and you're feeling like you're accomplishing something.
yeah.
Right? Because there's also the like that could have just showed up in the bedroom for you. So you didn't need to like that wasn't the initial first order focal point for you because you had the conviction with the game and then it was just showing up in the bedroom. There's also, of course, scenarios on the flip side where somebody only has game but then is bad in the bedroom or only is good in the bedroom but then is socially insecure.
No, it's true. And that one is very interesting to me because it exists. There are guys, and I think they must have like a really strong instinctual like awareness in that in the bedroom, because to me it's crazy. Like you're a guy, you're so super socially awkward, but in the bedroom you're completely, you know, every single fucking thing to do.
So I updated somebody like that.
Yeah.
It was very interesting because obviously that's one of the case study examples of like socially. And it was always, I don't know if it was as noticeable to everyone as it was to me. I just kind of feel like I have a sense of it. Like
Yeah.
it was pulled off and carried very well. But in the bedroom, it was absent. And it was almost like instead of you like with like collecting the validation through the game, it was the validation through the bedroom. Like he knew he was good in the bedroom. And that, there's some weight to that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas also like there can be situations where somebody has really good game and you get in the room and it's just like, like whatever. So it's like, so then what are we revealing there? It's like, does that harmony or lack of harmony between those two things, what is that? What's important to look at there for people?
I mean, I think it goes to show how important so like bedroom game is, I guess you could say. Because like I do think that you can break it down. Like I had my whole thing like the three pillars of attraction. So that had, it was almost like three concentric layers. So you had pre-selection, which was sort of like passive attraction, and then you had game, which was persona, which was like your active attraction, and then you had your personality, which was like your core attraction. And I
Mhm.
think that that gets reflected also in sex. There's, you know, the pre-selection aspect of it, which is like, well, how do you look naked? You know, are you in in a are you going to turn the person on just by, you know, how you look and how you, and then you have the game itself, which is knowing what to do, knowing how to operate. And then you have the core self, like what is your sexual self? And I do think everybody has a sexual self. And I think the sexual self is where you get a lot of the compatibility stuff that either comes in or doesn't come in. It's like it's like a chemistry that exists there. So to some extent, you know, that is going to be something that you're going to have to, I mean, I this, so one of the things you see, and this happened like a few weeks ago, people talking about, you know, you don't need to know your sexual compatibility with someone before, before you get married to them. I think this is like a super, this is like,
That's good to talk about.
this is a good thing to talk about. This is like because it's a big like red meat thing where you like inevitably drive people crazy with it. I love that. So
Oh.
I am mostly in the category. I'm mostly in the category that you don't need to sleep with somebody beforehand to have a good sex life with somebody. And there's two reasons I say I'm mostly in that category. The first is because as we've sort of said, I do think that you can get a sense of that sexual compatibility through regular exchanges, because something within the sexual like flirting and everything that happens earlier is going to be reflective of how the two of you are actually going to be. There should be some sort of natural, like if you're just like absolutely not vibing with each other in terms of like if it's like it's forced to try to move the interaction forward, I think typically you're going to find that you have sexual incompatibilities there. There's just going to be some freezing that happens between the two of you. But I also think that what else do I think? This is where my sleep's fucking me over. What else was I thinking, Trina? Jump in. I'm gonna come back to it.
My opinion on that. I mean, actually, I can't really give a pure opinion on that. I think that if I've talked to somebody about sex, I don't think I've ever spoken to somebody who got married before they had sex. I've spoken to somebody who was a virgin until she got married. I've spoken to more than one person that was a virgin until they got married, and man and a woman, but I didn't talk to them about what the answer to that question, right? If that's something that you could pick up on. But I mean, on one level, I do totally agree with you in terms of like, oh, can you pick up something in terms of how you guys would engage in that intimate conversation based on just your chemistry and how you engage with each other and the intimacy level non-sexually? Absolutely. Totally. 100%, 50% agree. Do I know for sure? Like I said in the last episode, being a see for myself fast learner and the liabilities that implies on a conversation about sex, I can't imagine getting married to somebody without like having experienced having sex with them. I can't. I can't imagine it. And I I don't know how relevant this is, but I can't imagine taking a man's virginity. That is crazy. Which also brings into the play of like, men's sexual experience and that validating a man's, place in the sexual marketplace.
Well, I'm gonna write that down because I don't want to forget to go to that about take male first sexual experience. I want to ask you about that, but I want to digress off of this.
Okay.
The other reason that I think that it's usually okay is because so that's sort of like fireworks, electric sexual chemistry between, two people. I don't think that you can I don't think you can guarantee that if you don't, if you haven't slept with them before marriage. But I don't think that at the same time it precludes a good sex life, because as long as there's not like that sort of fundamental incompatibility between the two people, like that sort of like frigid, awkward, dance, like the way that they're moving together, as long as that's not there, and the people keep themselves attractive and they learn how to, please, pleasure the other person, I think you're going to have a great sex life. There may be missing that extra je ne sais quoi, but often, unfortunately, that comes with like really other toxic behaviors. So I'm not even sure. Not always, but I just think it's like many things when you're choosing like a long-term mate. You're looking to hit thresholds. You're looking to pass thresholds. You're not necessarily looking to max out every single category, because it's not realistic to do it. I mean,
No. And I don't mean to be implying that I promote that. It's interesting, right? Because we're talking about like a very slippery slope, right? I'm not necessarily implying advice about what's the best way to navigate the beginning, especially when minding, the sanctity through which something happens that's degradable with a woman. I think that's objectively true. Are we allowed to speak from that?
Yeah.
But of course, nuance. Like I'm like, oh, we mentioned this on our first conversation of like, oh, if she's not a virgin, her body counts 100, right?
Yeah.
This extremist lens. In reality, nobody really operates like that. And I think that you would agree with me there based on, pieces of content you put out and opinions that I know of yours. Right. And I don't know where along the spectrum we are there, but the reason I'm illustrating that is because if we're speaking from a lens of experience and you have an experience that teaches you something about yourself, it would be short-sighted to say that those, and maybe to get spiritual for a second, those aren't happening for a reason, right? To almost instill or catalyze something that wouldn't have otherwise been catalyzed to then position you for destiny, your person, right? Because I'm a big believer in like things are really put on your path for a reason. Yeah, you can repeat and loop cycles, which is why it's really bad to just go out and just like bulldoze everything. Because and if we're implying somebody just sleeps with everybody to like as one of the boxes to check mark off to see whether that's their person or not, that's not what I'm implying. Because what would that imply? That would imply that somebody keeps recycling a lesson they're not learning in their like karmic curriculum.
Well, correct. Yeah, exactly.
And I think trying to imply that.
Yeah, and I think that's where the really damage from it occurs, when it becomes like a mindless sort of habit. And I'm not even saying that a woman can't heal. I think anyone can heal from anything, but there is definitely a truth that the more damage that you accumulate, the harder it is to let go of. And I think part of the reason the harder is to let go of it is not actually what a lot of guys in the manosphere suggest, which is that, oh, she can't pair bond because she's had too many. I don't think it's that so much. I think women have a hard time forgiving themselves for doing it. And that there's a sense of like, I really shouldn't have been doing this so long. And they can feel some sort of judgment, and they judge themselves for it. And then there's kind of like a shutdown. Like, I'm going to keep guys at arm's length. I want a guy who's going to, and they set themselves up for a repeat pattern of some of this stuff where they can, a guy can make them feel good about themselves. Because I don't think, like, putting aside some very, very, very high sex drive, high openness women, right, who typically make a career out of it. Let's be honest here. I would say that most women engage in sort of mindless, promiscuous sex from attention seeking or some sort of social contagion in the environment, like, college hookup culture or something like that. Otherwise, I don't really think it's in typical girls' nature to do that.
No. If I think of when I've gone out a lot in my life, like I love going out, having a good time, having drinks, right? I've been out with women on both ends of the spectrum. And if I was to give you an anecdote of like going out with somebody who sleeps around a lot, like she would like gloat to her body count about her body count to me after she got out of this long-term relationship, super toxic situation, had a lot of trauma, whatever. And she would, every time I would go out with her, it was like she was like a hunter.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where they like make those like funny memes about like, oh, like the 1,000 cock stare or whatever.
Yeah,
don't really have that. But it's this, when the woman is in that and you have a front row seat to it, and I know that I can do this. And I know that if I lead with this is a reliable thing to create that pull or that validation or whatever it is. So because that just gets so much like validation for it, this has become my go-to way of, I go out, I find somebody, I make it clear that I'm a sure thing. And it's like, every time they go out, that's what they need. Otherwise it's like, wow, I didn't even have a good time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's exactly right. Yeah.
It's the woman that's a little bit more like, you got to earn it a little bit, like, or whatever it is. And I think it's funny because it almost ties back to the whole thing we were talking about with like people's core self-esteem and sense of self. It's like, we touched on the last episode of like, social people being able to enjoy themselves.
Yeah.
I don't think on both ends of those extremes, those people are actually able to enjoy themselves. One struggles with it's, you know, it's okay to enjoy sexual experiences. I'm just a human and this is important to me and it's not meaningless to me, but I'm also a human just, you know, having a sexual experience. And the other end of it, it's not her just enjoying herself. It's like, I'm using my body as a tool to get this validation, or like almost short circuit a way to have a man approve of me in the only way I know how. And I've gone so far down that path that I don't know how to do it differently.
Yes, I 100% agree, and it's actually very safe for them
Yeah.
because, you know, and that's, I think, why a lot of times they don't even necessarily kiss, you know what I mean? It's like, this is about getting that validation, getting the guy. They'll tell it themselves that it's like a conquest, they got this win, but really, it's like they have control in the situation, and they don't get to get hurt by opening up, committing, getting let down, and I think, and this is where I think, you know, like the manosphere guys, like they get the inputs wrong because they're solipsistic, right? I
What do
love
you
that.
what inputs do you think they get wrong?
Well, I think that they're viewing it from the standpoint of the other guys break her in some way, whereas I really think that the other guys are almost irrelevant. It has to do with, I'm not saying every other guys, and we'll talk about that in a second, but I think by and large, the hookups are meaningless and they're just validation. You know, oftentimes there's alcohol involved. There's not even a lot of necessarily feeling the experience. Like maybe it's a fucking really mediocre fuck, or maybe it's a pretty good one. But it at the end of the day, they're all passing through through the mist of time. Like it's not these are not things that she's like really anchoring into as things that, because the whole point was to get a bump. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
like,
it's almost like it's like a drug.
yeah, it's
And
like
then
a
they
drug.
need their next fix because it's never gonna lead to something sustainable.
And so you have the girls who start to do that to begin with are doing it to protect themselves from getting hurt because they don't want to be rejected by a guy. So they go through a bunch of hookups like this. And then it becomes a real fucking trap because now they've really damaged their value in the, so they want to have a loving relationship. They're like, I've been abusing myself doing this. But now they have like a lot more shame, a lot more self-rejection than they had before. They went
And their window of letting things maybe take an organic developmental thing is shortened. They have zero tolerance or patience for that. You know what
yes.
I mean? Because they're so used to having this quick hit that, and they keep running that path over and over, that if there would never be, it would be a complete overhaul in terms of standard operating procedure
Yeah.
to like have something organically find its place, right? And I think if we got to there about where something can organically find its place, that's where, and we keep opening up more and more layers, and you and I are always trying to anchor on a certain one. But there, it brings me to think of like, there's a lot of nuance there, right? Because there's also people that have gotten married and they slept together on the first date, and the
Mhm.
dynamic changed from just being like, oh, we just chatted, fucked, and then this was my person, and we actually ended up like really loving and respecting each other. And then there's also the whole like, oh, you did have that like build up that tension, and it was very clear from the kickoff that these are da da da. So like, it's just such a whole wide open thing. I'm not sure where to land on there, but what was my initial point? My initial point was, yeah, the short tolerance, and it's almost like a circuit. And I think that's when, if I'm talking from the feminine perspective, they'll arrive at that, you know, I don't know, something like the dark night of the soul, or like something, things have gotten so bad, so hopeless that it's like they either, you know, from a Christian standpoint, like repent, ask for forgiveness, or it's like totally go into this like year of isolation or whatever it is. Because I also know women I grew up with who were like that, and then now they're married and have a bunch of kids and are very religious and all these different things. And I
Mhm.
think that always implies at some point somebody going through that circuit or whatever it is, there has to be some, I just assume or know that there had to have been some sort of breakdown in some way at some point, whether it's her with herself, or, you know, her in relation to another friendship or mentorship or dynamic, that I think things have to do a complete reset somewhere. But
Yeah,
I can't see it developing past that.
I think it's like with any addiction, there's a certain point where you're like, you know, I can't keep doing this. What the fuck? You know, like there's a certain point where you realize the humiliation of the addiction. And, you know, so for a girl hooking up, it could be, she has her usual conquest and the guy just like fucking comes in her and then walks out the door, and then she suddenly looks at herself and she's like, I'm trash right now. Like, what have I been doing to myself? And I do think that often the response to that is like a period of separation that they usually will then exit. If they actually, if it wasn't just like, I'm going to get the next high again, if it's actually like that moment, that then they'll stop hooking up pretty much entirely and they'll go through this period of healing. But I think this is now the next trial jump, because now, like you said, they have this, this extra layer of avoidance that they have, and they have they're in a really vulnerable state. So like they really want that love. They know that they're worried about putting out again, but it's also like these girls paint themselves into a big trap too, because they don't want to. You start dating a guy, and you're not gonna, you're trying to hold off on having sex because you don't want to cheapen yourself, but you've like slept with 100 guys before. Like that guy, like it becomes like a real branding issue. You know what I mean? Like you gotta like rebrand.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like I think the fundamental, if we were to look at the core thing and what people to look at, whether it's within themselves or somebody else, I think it's control, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's those women have lost a sense of control in whatever healing period they go through. Because even, for example, a woman who sleeps with you off the bat, and then you enter a long-term good relationship, maybe even if it wasn't for keeps or it was for keeps, the difference between there that's very much more tricky to see is, did she choose to do this? Yeah. Or is it just a loop that she's running? Right. And that can be, it's just like the difference. Niels, you know Niels. Mm-hmm. I remember he had a tweet at one point, and it was something about, it wasn't about sex, even though he's very good at talking about sex too. I think he was talking about the difference between like crazy and genius. Mm-hmm. And he was pointing to, it's very hard for an external party sometimes, unless like you have a sense of these things, to tell whether somebody's in control or they're not in control. But that really is the difference between crazy and genius. I think that's a similar parallel to what we're talking about, right? Where the nuances of somebody who's not a virgin and is not a whore, or like somebody you slept with them on the first 3 dates, or you waited to sleep with them. I think that the fundamental core seed of it is somebody being in control of their selves.
Yes.
Right? Is it a choice? Or is it running like a trauma loop or a sense of validation that's cheap, like an addiction? I think really it's about control for the man and the woman.
I agree with that. And I think that where it gets to be really subtle and difficult is that people might think they're in control. It's like Bane when he like puts like, do you feel in control? Like they don't know, they'll tell themselves that I'm doing this because I want to do it, but they're really doing it. It's an ego defense. And they're not being honest with themselves about the real reasons for it. And I think you can feel it when it's different, because there's a much more, like you said, there's more control in the interaction. I do think by and large, though, it is mindless. I think, and one thing I'll also point out is that a lot of the pickup guys, I find this funny, because pickup guys will talk about all these, about the kind of girl that they would commit to, that they're looking to commit to, right? But they never commit. They never ever do it. It doesn't matter. Like, you're good at getting women. You should have no problem getting the demographic of women that you say you want, but you never commit. So say, well, I have too many options. All right, it's fair enough. But then don't comment on like the commitment stuff here, or because it's like there's something that they're not honest with themselves about. And all the guys, like myself included, who have gone through pickup and come out of it, all have the same kind of observation about how it's the same kind of dopamine hit. And a guy can say, and I do think in some ways it's different, but not in a lot of the core fundamental ways. Like you're still dopamine hitting, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you're going out there and you're just kind of constantly trying to pick up girls, get more and more girls, there, you don't. What is your real objective? Be honest with yourself. I do think that there are a handful of guys, like for instance, Nash, who are genuine like artist, scientists. Maybe I think that there's a genius level there with Nash, right? Because he's so he's so interested in understanding all like the dance and all the different layers to it.
Yeah, I think that's part of like a purpose, a more
Yeah.
purpose sort of thing where he's supposed to explore humanity in that way, which is so like
but that's a really rare vocation, and most of those guys
yeah, most people should not hear that because then they'll be like, this is my purpose.
most of those guys completely fool themselves with that.
Yeah. I also want to touch on something before we go off from there.
Yeah.
You talked about people who have transcended the pickup game, and they'll never commit. I think that it's almost a parallel to what we were just talking about with the woman who's a whore or whatever. It's where like a man, tell me if you agree with this or partially agree with it or disagree. Say for example, a man's been with one woman and then has sex with her and then marries her. And then the man who's been with 100 women and then goes through his personal trials and then marries the last woman and has a beautiful, loving relationship. I think the difference between that and where body count comes into play, even whether it's for a man or a woman, is there will always be some sort of, say somebody's playing a video game, I'm saying, make a really stupid analogy, and they keep getting to level 10. Mm-hmm. And level 10 is where they keep failing, right? I think for a man, it can be, I get to this level or point in the dynamic, and that's the point that I haven't passed yet. So then I just restart from zero with the next, right? And until you overcome or address whatever you as a human need to address with yourself to get over that level, then you will rerun that whole course from level 1 to level 10, just with a different energy or a different person. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where people can elongate their timeline in that, on that level. Right. And then it's like if they, and then again, everything will break down at a certain point. And it's like, what am I supposed to be transcending or changing here?
Yeah. They get to the same point and then it's like, I don't want to go to the next level yet. I'm going to repeat it with somebody else. And eventually, you would hopefully get, I don't know. I get bored of that. I got bored of that pretty quickly. And I will say this, that I think that this is when we talk about the notch stuff and different between like men and women. I think that this is where the big like difference between the sexes, fair or not, comes into play. That guys need to like learn how to like we know like a woman, if she's attractive, she can go out, she can get laid, right? She may not be able to get a guy who she wants to commit with long term, but like this sort of like I got a notch thing, I got a conquest for a girl is not impressive. Sorry, it's not. But for a guy, there is a level of that. And so I do think that for guys, there is some like degree of going out there and I'm not saying that they should do this. I'm just saying that it can be part of their mastery and development to become an attractive person. Now, here's the thing is that how long does that actually take and how far do you have to go to get there? I think in the past it was like maybe like a rough and tumble with like a girl in the bushes, and then that was it. You know what I mean? There wasn't a lot. Whereas now I think a lot of the pickup guys, they don't know how to get out of it. And so they'll do this. And I think this is to be more precise, because I don't think I was being clear enough. And that maybe made it sound like unfair or flippant. I think the issue is that they'll say that this is the kind of girl that they want, that a guy wants, and that's high value. But the reality is that they're actually burned out. They've experienced so many different women that a lot of women are way too simplistic to actually possibly capture their imagination. And so they have no reason to, they have no interest in picking the woman who they say is good. It's almost like maybe that would be good for a guy who didn't have a lot of experience, but for them at that point, it's over. And but they don't admit that. They don't admit the fact that like I'm fucking burned out. Like I'm fucked up right now.
It's just like, it's a more macro version of like, if you walk up to 9 girls at a bar and you get rejected by all 9, you're gonna not have as much morale or gusto to approach the 10th girl.
No.
Right? Same thing. It's like, oh, you've put into something to make it work or whatever, and then things don't work. It's like after a while, people's resolve degrades, right? And there has to be some sort of recentering. And I do think you also another thing you pointed to was, I think it's an important, and this is controversial, like this is something a lot of women would be like, Trina, I think it's really important to masculine development. In my experience, having brothers and homies and working with men, like they do need, it's part of a, if we're going to make a feminine masculine self-development parallel, I think it's important to a woman's sense of power to know that she can protect the yin. And as a man, he needs to know that he can game and get laid. So you were pointing to like, it is part of the development to be able to go out and be like, to know that you can get a girl and get her in bed. But that brings in the controversial thing of like, okay, so are you saying that it's a healthy self-development tool for men to be able to go out and game and like take a girl home? On some level, yeah. Even though that's a liability if we're talking from the woman's standpoint, because I also am not trying to imply that men don't have aren't responsible for, in this feedback loop of creating women who are too far gone, because men taking women home in this dynamic obviously contributes to the feminine degradation element too. But that's super paradoxical.
And also, I mean, some guys may disagree with that in the modern era, but if you like, the statistics kind of back this up.
Do they?
What I'm about to say, the statistics back it up. Okay. Just trust me. Just trust me. Okay, trust me, bro. A lot of these guys who are hooking up, like a lot of the girls who are having sex, like there's a lot. How do I gotta say this properly? There are a lot of women who are not having a lot of sex, and that's well borne out by statistics. So you have this stuff where like modern women are all whores. Like, well, the statistics show a lot of women are like never had sex. They're having less sex than they've ever had before.
Yeah.
But then there's like the bell curve is just really fucking stretched. You have some women who are having like shit tons of sex. They're sleeping with everybody. And so a lot of these guys, for better or for worse, I guess you could say, are sleeping with the same women over and over again. Those women are representing a disproportionately high number of the notch count.
Yeah. It's just like you're pointing to like the loudest members of a group will obviously get the most attention.
Yeah.
And then create almost the reputation of that group. Right. Yeah. So if we're saying that like not every woman is a whore, but the whores are obviously like getting around more exposure, whether it's in terms of attention or sexual experience or both, then you're just going to be more exposed to those cases.
And unfortunately, I don't think that the implications of it are positive. I think that it's a result, both extremes are a result of a profoundly sexually fucked up society. Yeah. Like, I think a lot of Christian people will say like, well, it's good, she's been this virgin for a really long period of time. I mean, I think that really like having sex is good and normal. And, if a woman is not having sex because she's preserving her value, good, right? Yeah. That's a conscious choice. That's strong boundaries, and she's going to benefit from it. But if a woman's not having sex because she's just fucking terrified of men and she's so anxious, well, that's nothing really like laudable about that. There's nothing special. Yeah, you don't get you don't get a fucking cookie for that. Like this is so, and that's the whole thing. It's like, what's the intention behind all this stuff? Like you have, if a guy is going out and he's meeting women and he's trying to hook up with women, but he's trying to hook up with women really because he's trying to like understand and master himself. He's trying to like, he's putting himself out there beyond his edge. Then I do think overall he's benefiting from this. And by the way, if you're a really religious guy, you don't want to have sex before marriage, you can do this and still not have sex, right?
Yes, absolutely.
But the point is that it's this idea that you have to create your value as a man. There's a point though, I think with the hookup stuff that you're not really like, now you're mastering a routine, and mastering a routine is not like, that's actually not so much stepping outside of your comfort zone in any way. And this is one of the things I really want to mention, because, okay, like I work with guys on their dating lives and relationships, but there's two types of guys I work with who have dating problems. And everyone thinks it's like, oh, it's like you're Hitch. Like these guys are, they can't talk to women. They just struggle to get dates. And yeah, I do work with those types of guys. But the other type of guy I work with has no problem whatsoever getting women. They hook up with women all the fucking time. The problem is that they are bored by the women that they're attracting. They are the guys who are, whether they were in pickup consciously before or whether they were just naturals and they were able to do it, they're at the point where there's like a burnout. And what happens is that they're not actually showing their full personality. There's the part of them that could get hurt is removed from the flirtation, from the dance. And so of course they're getting bored, because think about it. You're saying the same shit that you said to every other girl, and it's working every single time. So it's pretty predictable at this point. And the second part of it, of course, is that you're going to devalue a girl who falls for something that you know works on every other girl.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're not going to, like, you actually have to take the step of putting yourself out there more, of showing something a little bit more like real about yourself. I'm not saying like that you drop the game, but there's much more of like a willingness to be seen, to connect.
Yeah, there's a level of like skin in the game that they are met with the opportunity to put in when it's the right situation. And that might be the level 10 that they couldn't pass.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's become so reliable to just run that route. Whereas, is this an opportunity to surpass level 10? And I don't get and if I want to surpass level 10, we don't get the luxury of what we want to jump into our comfort zones.
Yeah.
Right? We're at every level of ascension, whether it's in health, wealth, or relationships. You are met with certain points in your journey where you are challenged to stretch your comfort zone and, put enough into that to where what you want can fit in its new boundaries. And for a guy, that might look like something beyond. From an external view, other guys might be like, wow, he always gets so many women, like he, no problem. He always another one. Like if this one doesn't work out, he'll get another. But from his standpoint, he's really struggling, right?
Yeah.
Because he wants to, his baseline maximum of what he can achieve isn't satisfying for him, even if it's what other guys would die to be able to get to that point. This is his challenge.
Mm-hmm.
This right there. So I mean, what would you, I'm sure it's different for every guy, but it's like, what does that become for the masculine? Like what are
well, I think it has to be like, the analogy that I've always used with this is, so okay, so let me take a step back from my analogy. Guys in this situation, they deceive themselves. Mostly they deceive themselves by saying that I want a new experience. So like, I've already gotten a girl, she's already into me. So, I want to get a different girl because I already seen this girl and I want something new. So they're telling themselves that they're having something new, but it's only superficially new. As you're saying, you've only gotten to a certain like depth in interaction with a woman. And by the way, this stuff is so funny to me when I hear these guys talk about long-term relationships. Like, dude, like it's such a different dynamic. Like, be a little bit more humble. I say that speaking to my past self. Like, be more humble, because it's very, very different when you're in the different layers you go down to, right? So the analogy that I've used is like, you have guys who are in, like, think of like a sheep in a pen, right? Like in a pasture, let's say it's a pasture, and the sheep can go all the way around the pasture. But every single time it gets to the fence, turns around and goes the other side of the pasture, thinks it's going someplace new every time. But it's trapped in the same bubble. You're not actually going anywhere new. The real expansion is on the other side of that. And that was a decision for me, like, when it ultimately came for my wife. And I think also to some extent with the relationship I had before that, in a different way, like you get to a point where it's like, okay, I am going to be giving up dating other women. And yeah, there's a loss there, I guess. But am I ready to leave the fucking pen? You know what I mean? Maybe there's something else out here, I guess. Maybe I can go back to the pen later if I really want to. But like, I want to see what's beyond it. And I have an opportunity to see what's beyond it. So let's do it. To me, the draw was greater depth of both myself, because of how it brings things out. And I think you have to view it like that as a man.
So you didn't really experience the burnout we're talking about. You experienced more like a confrontation with yourself, where it's like, do I want to keep running this loop, or do I want to change things because the trade-off is, at this point in my life, worth it to me? Is that fair?
I think it's fair. I mean, I have experienced the burnout. Probably at that exact moment, I wasn't there, but I could see I had enough experiences in that past year that made me think like I've already won. It just kind of be like running up the score. You know what I mean? Like it's not it wasn't it felt like it was too superficial of a reason at that point. Whereas if you had taken me back a year earlier, it probably wouldn't have been ready for it because I would have felt like I haven't really mastered this yet. So I had passing grades to move to the next level, and I felt really confident in doing that. And I felt really confident that I could always go back if I had to.
And you probably, correct me if I'm wrong, felt a little bit of inspiration from the energy that you encountered with your, in your person.
Yeah, I mean, it was like you could definitely feel like that there was something here. Like I don't know. I'm somebody who likes to go on the edge anyway. I mean, that's on the fucking Capitol building. You know what I mean? I'm not.
I'm kidding.
I'm certainly like I'm not an adrenaline junkie, but I am a risk taker, right? So it's maybe more conceptual risks and stuff like that. But
that's good to describe it as. Let's point that real quick. Risk tolerance.
yeah,
If you were to describe risk tolerance, it's not an objective thing because what somebody might perceive as a risk is different to somebody else, especially on a personal, interpersonal level, right? Is it a risk to commit to this, or is it more of a risk to give up my freedom? And the perception of that with you emboldening you actually changing something that ended up being your person for keeps and building a family and like whatever was, I'm willing to take that risk and go in on this because I know that I'll be okay. And even if this wasn't worth it, like, what's the worst case scenario? I go back to where I was that I know that I won't be losing for good. But that's totally paradoxical because you still obviously, went into it fully.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good way to put it. It is a degree of risk tolerance. And I'm not saying that everyone needs to mimic my degree of risk tolerance, but I will say this, that a lot of guys, and it's mostly in the manosphere community, when you see a lot of resistance to like committing and moving forward with a girl, it doesn't really have to do, I mean, they may not have a good idea of how to conduct proper due diligence because of the platitudes that they consume all day long that just ties them in a fucking knot.
And male fear mongering, a lot of that.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Like it's like you get like 20 different platitudes that, are often sometimes contradictory, like mutually exclusive with each other in some way that, a guy's like, I can't, they just become, it's analysis paralysis. Like I can't do anything. I can't figure it out because my little fucking checklist is all, it didn't.
Let's not forget all the misery stories that are loud, right? Oh my God, everybody is going to lose their freedom, lose having a good time, da, da, da. Whereas all like the couple married for life couples who are really enjoying themselves, which I know a lot of them, they're quieter.
But this is the thing, like, I'm not saying that like a single guy doesn't have a fucking good time. Like I'm not saying.
Yeah, of course. And you should, and I think that's important. You should enjoy yourself as a single guy.
But these people don't sound like they're having a good time. Like
right.
They don't sound. It's like, what are you giving up, man? Your life sucks. Like you're miserable. Like do something different. Maybe you need to shake things up a bit. And this is one of the things. Like I'll have guys, and sometimes I'll work with guys in this, and they're really hesitant about moving forward with a girl who I've vetted with her. Think she's fine. I'm not saying she's like perfect, but at his level, looking upward, right? There's a future for the two of them. They're afraid to move forward. And it's like, well, look, man, if you don't move forward, you're actually taking a bigger risk because you don't just get to sit here and like hold on to her forever and be in this safe, place. If you don't make an action, like time and events move past you and you lose the initiative, and then you get left, and like there's everything works out worse for you. I didn't get like any advice from my grandparents, which my grandfather, which sucked. My grandfather had like Alzheimer's when I was a kid, so I was gonna get it. But there was one piece of advice that got passed down, which is that it is much better, like if you don't know what decision to make, like just decide. Like you can't sit there in like an analysis paralysis situation.
Decision is such an opportunity cost tax.
Exactly. People don't appreciate it though.
No.
It's like, I'm gonna wait till the moment's right. Well, all the time you waited, you lost opportunities. You
Indecision is such a big seed to regret.
yeah.
Right? Like,
Huge.
you're talking to somebody at the end of their life, or like when their regrets with past relationships, it was like they couldn't just go into something to see, they couldn't take the risk of yes or no.
Yeah, it's always regrets about what things people didn't do. Like, I can tell you this, and I knew this all the time, and it was a big comfort for me. Like, when I was fucking sitting in prison, I'm like, I'm not gonna regret this when I'm dying. Like, it might suck now, but I'm not gonna regret it when I'm older. But like, if I had, if I had, if I had sat around with like my thumb in my ass and like, I don't know, I feel like I would have viewed myself as a coward, and maybe that was not the right decision to make, the right attitude to have. But I'm just being honest about it. Like, I think I probably would have felt that about myself at the time, given the shit that I had talked. So I was like, I gotta be at least congruent. I gotta fucking
Can I
jump.
ask you a question about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Did you guys talk about sex in prison?
Oh my God. I mean,
I'm sure that there's like, you're so like starved of any sort of, like, you don't even get like platonic social, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's just zero sexual energy in prison unless it's like bad.
if you want to be really candid here,
Okay.
it wasn't so much that I was talking about sex in prison, because I deal with a very different market of relationships than the relationships in prison. Like just being like totally blunt, you're dealing with like ghetto ratchet dynamics in there, like baby mamas,
Right.
like it's just fucking drama. But yeah, they're on like the illicit phones, and they're getting, girls touching her pussy and stuff. Like, I mean, there was all of that stuff. There was every bit of, sexual vulgarity that you could possibly, and it was obsessive. Honestly, it was obsessive. It was just the way it was in there. Yeah, those guys were really looking forward to having sex. I was looking forward to having sex too, but I don't know. It wasn't something that I felt the need to really like talk about. Like, it was obviously there. It's obvious, but a lot of those guys were also locked up a lot longer than me. So there's
Yeah.
that. But there's a few things I wanted to go back to.
Yeah,
So
we've departed quite a, well, we did.
no, that was me. That was me talking. But so you mentioned something with male virgins.
Hmm.
You said you wouldn't know what to do with that. So this is something that's interesting to me, because most guys say that they want a female virgin. I think a lot of this is like they want it for a reason besides for the sex, right?
Yes.
So I don't think guys want a female virgin for the sex. They want it for the claiming of the territory. They don't want it for the
It's a big ask of a man's ego.
yeah.
No matter if her body count is 2,
Yeah.
to accept on a fundamental level that the woman that you are with has slept with somebody else.
Yeah.
Even if it was before you, and you can't blame her at all because she didn't even know you would come into her life and be her person yet, right? But that's always going to be true.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm highlighting that because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, for the man, it's like the man who expresses that he wants a virgin in a lot of cases, and this is so risky to say, right? Because I'm not trying to take away from the whole, like,
Yeah.
2 people find each other and don't have sex until they have their person, and I'm not trying to like take anything away from that. We're having a very fringe conversation. But I think a lot of the scenarios of men being like, oh, I want a virgin, otherwise she's a whore, they don't move through life like that. They really don't, because it's almost like an ego thing where it's like, this doesn't have to mean anything to me because it's not the virgin.
Yeah.
So I can have sex with these women, and because they're not the virgin that I want in this fantasy world, I can enjoy myself and also disqualify all of them.
Well, that's the Madonna whore compartmentalization.
Right. Madonna horror complex. Yeah.
And some cultures really have it seriously. Like, I think I may have talked about this before, but I haven't seen it more extreme than in like the Middle East. Like in the Middle East, it is off the charts extreme.
Oh, really?
But every guy has it. I think a guy, he may not have it to such an extreme that he feels like he wants to say that he has it, but every guy has it. Every guy has it. I know I have it. You know, you have to, and I think women have their own iteration of it. You know, lover provider,
100%.
Complex, and you know, it's just us trying to reconcile the holes. It's actually like the reason it's an inevitability is because we live in a realm of polarity, and we're trying to, from a consciousness perspective, hit unity and get out of it. So all it is a constant, you know, process of integration. And I guess you could say the less integrated you are, the more it's compartmentalized and separated, and the more you attempt to merge it, the more you're transcending, so to speak, because you're becoming a unified whole. But
the more they're at conflict instead of being able to like complement each other, just be at opposite ends of the spectrum. But we need to go back to your initial thing about male virgins. I'm so sorry.
no, I was always just doing the lead up to it. So, but I've always wondered about this from the perspective of a woman, because I think some women like consider it kind of like an honor, and they'll even be like it's almost like they view it. So you have the typical dynamics between a man and a woman, where like the man has to, you know, be impressive in some way, and then the woman responds sexually to it. But you have moments in relationships where like the woman wants to give the man something because of the situation he's in or whatever. There's I don't want to call it a pity fuck, because a pity fuck is like maybe it is a little bit. Maybe it is a pity fuck. It's not always like
I just thought of Forrest Gump. I just thought of Forrest Gump. Remember that scene where she like pity fucks him?
I haven't. It's been such a long time. I'm like such a movies.
Sorry.
I guess what I mean is it's not always degrading. It's not always like degrading to the guy. But yeah, maybe it is a pity fuck. But it's like okay. This is what I mean. It's not. It's coming from like a kindness though. It's not coming from like I have contempt for you, so I'm gonna do this. You know what I mean? It's like a kindness. So like this, like a woman.
You're saying that the woman is like taking his virginity as a gift.
Yes, it's a feminine gift. It's like Aphrodite is coming down, and I actually think that there's archetypal capture. I really do think that. I think people have some degree of archetypal capture, and I think that in certain moments, a woman, it's like she's not interested in the guy. She might think he's a nice dude, whatever. Maybe they're friends, and then she finds out he's a virgin, and it's like I have to act as a vessel outside of myself now for this individual. And so some women are like that. Like there's plenty of stories of it, of a woman who finds out that a guy's a virgin, and she wants to like be the one who bestows the gift. Some do it out of ego, some do it for the gift. But a lot, and maybe most, really are like, oh my God, like I don't want that.
I've never been exposed to that iteration of human. And I don't get to like.
So for you, it's not appealing. So tell me about that. Is it just because it's like this guy can't fuck? He doesn't know what he's doing. Is that
try to like logically articulate the feeling? Because if somebody were to come to me and say I like thought a guy was hot and I'm attracted to him, or I like him, or I have a crush on him, or whatever it is, and then I'm talking about it to somebody who knows them, and they were like, be like, well, he's a virgin. My visceral, when I do that as a thought experiment, my visceral reaction is, that feels, let me try to articulate it. That almost feels like a, it's not like it's almost a, I don't know if it's I don't want that responsibility, or I don't want, like when I think about that, it's just not, it's so insulting. This is so, I can't believe we're saying this.
You're doing it raw.
What is it? Yeah, I know. Now we're doing this topic. I want to be the one that's, I don't know how this is going to sound. I want to be the one that's more sacred in that level than you.
Yeah.
And if I'm
I understand what you're saying.
And I'm facilitating that, it's almost like it's just like you're more innocent than me.
It makes you almost feel more like the whore. It almost makes you feel more like the whore doing it.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
I want you to be the man, and but also this is might not be a reliable version of opinion for that, because also I think that, which might point to what you're talking about with that archetype of the woman who like gives it as a gift or does it for ego. For me, it's I have less than like other women really struggle. And this happens in girl talk all the time, right? I like the idea. Like I have less than zero problem with if I'm dating a guy or seeing a guy or in a relationship with a guy and he's talking about his past experiences. It's less than zero threat to me. But that's pretty not that's pretty rarer. That's much rarer than a woman being like, oh my God, the idea of you having been with a woman before me pisses me off, even though you didn't know me yet. And
Yeah.
I almost like that. Like I love being able to talk about past experiences with whoever I've been dating, and that's been met with. So like I think that feeds into it because it's like, oh, I fully heartedly accept you've been with women before me, and it doesn't insult me in any way, and I almost take it as a positive, right? Whatever that implies about me. So the opposite of you having zero experience in that way, it's like there's a purity to you that is. This sounds so bad in terms of me speaking about myself, but like it's like, oh, it's boy, like it's not sexy. It's just like,
Yeah.
oh, like what?
Well, there's another thing to it, and you gave a piece of context to your decision there that I think is relevant, is that you found out that person was a virgin. And I think that reaction is really typical when a woman finds out a guy's a virgin. But I think that the nuance here is, let's say you and a guy have been talking, like, you know, you're turned on, everything has been moving, you've been dating, everything's normal, and you get to that point, and then you find out he's a virgin. I think that there's a if
Mm.
if there was like a closeness and there was already something established there, I don't think it has. I'm not saying that nothing that you're talking about would come into play, but I do think it's different because in the first scenario that you're describing, you're talking about a guy who it's sort of like he's abstracted then. He's been categorized into something, whereas later on it becomes almost like a contrast point. Like, here's this guy who I was attracted to. I wanted to sleep with, and now I find out actually, wait, he doesn't have this experience. You know what I mean? Like,
Actually, you're right, because if I did a thought experiment and I didn't know, and I didn't find out, and then we get to the point where we have sex and it's like all this intimacy, there's like a level of intimacy or attraction or whatever that's built up, and then it happens, and I didn't know up until that, I don't see that being as much of a turnoff. So maybe it's that the idea of it is not as attractive, and maybe the literal thing, and this is good, right? This is good for the man who's a virgin and has taken a long time to have sex. Then this is good for him because this means that there are ways that he can navigate up until that point that are in his. This is important because this is playing on, the what we say we want and what we say and what we actually can build a desire for. There can be a very big dissonance between those two things.
mm-hmm.
And this is important for a man if he was talking from the whole like how to navigate a woman or approach his dating life thing, because if you were to just listen to the voice of, oh my God, I don't want to have sex with a virgin, then you might get in your own way to ever going to that point by just listening to what a woman says she wants.
Right. So women don't know what they want. Is that what you're saying, Trina? They don't know.
I think that a lot of people don't. I think that's self-development right there, right? There's a dissonance between what you think you want and what you want. And when you're forced to look at behaviorally or emotionally what's happening versus the story you're telling yourself, that's where a lot of the work happens.
Well, so here's a topic, and I mean, I don't know if we're going to tread new ground on this, but I think we often come up with things on the fly. but speaking about, saying you want something and not actually wanting it, the whole like the regret, and like we're talking about like sexual abuse, like sexual allegations, like allegations that like, oh, we took advantage of me. This stuff with a woman, I mean, is it just the regret thing portion that they do it and then the next day they feel dirty in some manner, maybe because they pursued the guy themselves? I mean, that's some of the things that like blows my mind. Like, obviously you have the standard case where the girl's sort of passive and doesn't really put up much resistance to his advances, and then she feels regret about it. But sometimes, like, the girl is the one who even makes the advances to begin with, and then she feels ashamed about doing that.
Mm.
And then there's the regret thing. So is there more to this? Like, you said you've had some some women who have done this before. Is that?
Yeah, I'm gonna get in trouble. So I've had at least 2 experiences where first I had a front row seat to women claiming rape when it was not rape.
Hmm.
Even that word. And one of them was in college, and I was good homies with this guy. He had previously dated a friend of mine, so that's why. And then we became friends through that. And then afterwards, we were around each other in college, whatever. He was dating this girl. Oh my god, what if this video pops off and they're like, "I'm talking about this." Anyways, they dated, whatever. And then at a certain point, she starts saying he abused her in bed. And they had a really, like, you could gather they had like a toxic chapter to their relationship, or maybe the whole thing was toxic. I don't really know enough. And I had my biases because I was friends with the ex, blah, blah. Anyways, I knew him, and my bias as his friend is also, I don't think this is true. And in my gut, like, I didn't feel like it was true. Anyways, you see her talking about it, blah, blah. And then fast forward whatever amount of time, she ends up apologizing, writing a letter to his parents and all this stuff, that it wasn't true and that she lied. Right. And, behind closed doors, just talking with the guys, like, it's like, yeah, no, we were having sex, and like, we got a little aggressive with it, and it was, we were both in it, it was happening. And then and then we got in a fight, and there was resentment. And then she like accused him of this. Another scenario, I didn't really know the girl, and I was supporting her at a party. She was really, really drunk. And it was a bathroom situation. I'll never forget. I'm like, I have her sitting on the toilet. I'm sitting on the edge of the tub, and I was helping her. And she starts just bawling and just spilling out all the shit. And she's like, yeah, like, I didn't want to have sex with him, blah, blah. But like, I said that he raped me, da. And in these 2 scenarios, like, I made a comment. I spoke about this publicly when the Johnny Depp case came out. And I have no grounding in logic or analysis of the case or whatever really happened. But just following my intuitive craziness, I thought of those 2 scenarios, and I thought it pointed to a really important thing about like shadow work, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you think about the part of you that's wounded, and as a woman who like doesn't really know what she wants, or her actions aren't aligning with what she wants, and then she's trying to like recover that, then it's like the best defense is a good offense, right? To protect that part of you that acted in this way against what you want, or maybe what you did want, and the way you want to be seen, right? Because I think you also pointed to this too. There's 2 levels of it. There's, am I not okay with this because it's not what I wanted and I betrayed myself, whether it was agency or passivity? Or am I not okay with this because I don't want people to know, or if they were to know, that idea sickens me? Because we want good attention. We want to be seen in a certain way. We want to be this pure whatever, right? So shame can come from different sources. But all of this is to say, it brings in a really, really controversial level of the conversation where ultimately, it's blame. At its fundamental root, it's blame, right? You are responsible. Yes, a man is responsible for a consensual sexual dynamic, right? But also, let's not pretend women are completely innocent here. Whether it's agency or passivity, even if you have to take responsibility for the fact you didn't have the balls to say no. Like I'm thinking of that meme where that girl's like sitting there in the room, shame. She like invited him over, and she's in a bra, and she's like, oh my God, he's about to fuck me. And like, I'm so sad about it. But you have agency in that, right? And self-development aside, if there's no, and maybe that involves like, oh, I need to have social boundaries, or a father who's overlooking me, or, or maybe the parental, whatever the structure is, it sucks because when that's broken down and a woman doesn't have that, it becomes this really controversial area of, okay, how are people responsible for it? Where does that end? And where do we draw the line with people compensating for it? Because you can completely ruin somebody's life and also take away from the actual sexual liabilities that happen when a man does sexually assault a woman by just, it all just boils down to a level of blame and not lack of self-accountability.
Yeah. And I think this is where a lot of the frustration is right now, because Western society, through feminism and whatnot, took this route of saying, okay, well, women have agency. Women can do things, right? We can just do things now. So I'm like meme dropping this entire.
I know, we're not lots of memes.
And I actually don't think that most Western guys really have an issue with that. But what they have an issue with is this sort of cake and eat it too middle ground, where it's like, I have agency, but I have no responsibility. It's like, no, that's not going to work. If you're going to have agency, you have to have responsibility, or you don't want responsibility, you have no agency. So and I think this is a lot of the tensions in the conversation right now are really like, where is this going to go? Like, where is it? And I don't know, where do you see from your conversations with women about where it's going to go? Because like,
it's the female atmosphere is not where I see it making a good turn. And it touches on what we landed on in our last conversation, where I said, in a cliche, stereotypical sense, behind the scenes on the female atmosphere, if a woman is like, oh, he sexually took advantage of me, everybody is going to immediately be like, oh my God, fuck him, da da da, like protect. And it's from a good place, right? It's a feminine protecting feminine.
Yeah.
But, and this is where I can get in trouble, right? Because when something comes out about that, I am the first to be like, I wonder if that's true. And that sounds like I'm an enemy to women, right?
But really, Trina, like, you're trying to save them from themselves. I mean, and I think, unfortunately, where a lot of the sort of increasing cultural understanding is occurring is that most women can't be responsible for themselves. And it's a really sexist statement to make, and I'm not saying all, like, you certainly are. I have some female friends who would never in a million years give up that kind of, they would always take responsibility, right? My wife would take responsibility, but there's a lot of women who are completely incapable of taking responsibility, and it becomes a real mess. And, guys then, for their part, have to have their own dilemma of whether to be like, well, too bad, so sad, where's your responsibility? Or to fall into our natural instinct, which is to be like, oh, we have to take care of you, right? And I'm just really wondering where this dynamic's going to go. I mean, I always try to be optimistic that we're moving up and that there's a lot more choice, but maybe the choice of some is to not have that. I don't know.
I think the problem is shame, because if I think about somebody I've had sex with, and I think about how I felt after that, and I regretted it. If I put myself in that shoes, just as a thought experiment to touch on what we're talking about here, my visceral, emotional, regretful feeling was, oh my God, like, compensate for that somehow, right? But then once you reach the point of, I'm communicating about it, or or you get to the point where you have a decision to blame, or something, right? Then that should be where the internal moral compass comes into play, where it's like, you either choose to take responsibility for what happened, or you choose to create this ripple effect, whether it's just in the privacy behind the corner with your best friend, or in a broader scale, like claiming public sexual allegations. No matter what scale it's on, you do have to, the reality is, you do reach a point where it's like, oh, fuck, like, do I want to be that liability? Like, is it going to ripple out beyond just me and my shame? And like, and I think that's where people get really, really lost, and that's where things can spiral.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, what do you ask of people at that point? And again, it goes back to like check-in. Like, if they can't be counted on to check in with themselves, there needs to be somebody in their life that can help them move through that well. And most people don't have that. Not most people. I don't know what number to put on it. I don't mean to make a quantitative claim, but it's because it's a really complex thing to navigate, right? I think it's why it's easier for me is because, like, getting to that point, it's like shame can make you attack.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm more towards, in my issues, it's been more like attack myself.
Yeah.
Right? So maybe that's not even me making a noble choice to, like,
internal versus external. Yeah.
Where some people might be more leaning towards attack external. That was so I'm not even saying I made that choice because I have more honor than those women. Maybe it's just like,
that's a really good distinction, because it does seem like the people in general who take more responsibility tend to be internally oriented rather than externally, just with anything. And there's a lot of men, by the way, who don't take responsibility. I think the only difference is that if a man doesn't take responsibility, other men will hold him to responsibility. you know, that's the distinction. It's like, well, you didn't want to take it, but we fucking know you're a bitch. You know what I mean? Like we're not forgetting, you know. So,
Wow.
now speaking of shame, I think that segues into something that I really did want to touch upon, which was the concept of sexual subtypes. And I'm really grateful to someone on my list who pointed this out. You know, there's that account on Twitter, Ayla. She's like, you know, escort, cam girl, but very intelligent. Are you familiar with her, Trina?
EILA?
Aella.
Yes, yes. Sorry,
A-
I'm really bad at remembering names, but I can remember like stories and pictures. Yes.
yeah, you know,
Yes.
I
I've
think
seen some good posts from her. I don't follow her, but she pops up on my feed.
yeah, she's very intelligent and she does like statistical stuff. Like she's like she
I know
has
nothing about sexual subtypes.
she has a really interesting skill stack, which is like fucking and statistics. You know, so it's like
Cool.
the two things come together, and she can do her own research because she's in that industry.
Okay.
Um, and you know, do you like everything that she says? Probably not. But so I was writing about something. I wrote about something like a month and change ago about rough sex. And just to be clear, I don't mean like dominant sex, but I mean there's like, because I think that's very high ranked with pretty much every woman. You know, most women want the guy to be dominant, but there's like a lot of commentary in the manosphere about, you know, really like she wants you to like fucking slap her face, like fucking gag her with your cock, like, you know, like just like come all over her eyes, like literally like really like, you know. And I'm like, you know, I haven't really dated a lot of girls like that who are healthy. You know, I'm and I kind of put this out there that about like this sort of cross reference between that's like certain kinds of sexual behavior and, you know, self-esteem and you know. Now, what's interesting in this, and what I want to open the discussion with is that in response to that, one of my subscribers sent me a link to some articles that Ayala had written about female sexual subtypes, and she had done like a statistical analysis talking to women, and women fell very broadly into two main categories of like the hurt me girls and the please me girls, and how there were, yeah, the hurt me girls tended to like to be things to be rough. And you know, she divided these in the further subtypes, where ones were just like very like aggressive versus like straight up degrading. And then you had the please me girls who, you know, they were the ones who, you know, wanted to have a more sensual experience and didn't really like getting degraded. And it was interesting to me because I I've definitely had more experiences with the please me girls, but I don't know if that's self-selection. You know, I have been with girls who like we did not click sexually. Like I could tell she wanted something from me that I wasn't really naturally prepared to give, because I'm a very, very generous lover. Like that was what I was very, very good at. And but I wonder if, you know, there were certain girls who were looking for a guy, because I remember there was one girl in college who I was into, and it was almost like there were like, and she responded to the flirting, but there was always something that kind of made her hold back. And I found out later on she was like really into like BDSM in that, and I bet she probably picked up something from me.
Yeah, she picked up on something from
Like
you.
I wasn't gonna fuck her the way that she wanted to be fucked.
Yeah, so she was probably attracted to you, but she knew she wouldn't be able to get that sexual dynamic from you on some level, from something in your interaction or just a sense of it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And so I think that there's something there to what we talked about in the very beginning when it comes to like sexual compatibility. You know, the vibes that can kind of be given off. But I also wonder, like, what is that? What if anything does a sexual subtype say? Because you hear a lot of stuff like, oh well, you know, it's just your kink. I don't know. I mean, I say like yes and no. Like I think that there can be that too, maybe a little bit. But when you start to get to like comprehensive behavioral patterns, like, is it, do you think that like a girl who really likes getting, you know, severely like like abused in the bedroom, do you think that she could have like a perfectly natural, healthy self-esteem and that just compartmentalized the sex? It's just how she likes it. What do you think?
Huh. That's such an interesting question. This is fun. I've never talked about this. I've thought of a few different examples that I'm hopefully going to use to answer a question. On one level, I think that that's crazy. I know I have friends who have told me about their sex life, and it involves so many things I've never experienced. So we talk about it, right? Like I have one couple friend, they like told me about they went to like the sex superstore and they like play with these toys and all this stuff. And I know her past. So I have friends with her for a long time, and they have like a very kinky element to it, but they have a great relationship.
Yeah.
And but I know that in the past she's had very unhealthy relationships, like borderline abusive, if not abusive. So it's interesting because it brings into play this thing of like formative experiences that bring not great things to what you feel comfortable with or what you're drawn to or what turns you on. And then do I think that you can land in a place where that's in the mix of your house blend and then you can end up with something healthy? Sure. Do I think the surface area of that becomes a lot smaller? Probably, I would assume so. And it asks a lot more of an energy that you're going to align with to maybe an unhealthy thing. But I don't think, as a general rule of thumb, that is a good sign. And then another scenario that I think of is one of my guy friends who lives in Europe, and I'm not going to say what country. I almost feel like that would give it away, even though I know. Whatever. Used to work with him, buddies. We'll FaceTime with him and his friend, and like we'll talk about our dating stories over the years. I haven't talked to him in a while. And one of the stories, they were on like Hinge or whatever, is this chick, liked her, and then they were having sex, and she wanted him to punch her.
Yeah.
He was like, dude, like I don't know what to do because whatever. And the other friend had been dealing with something where they just like got a little whatever, and then the girl got uncomfortable. So it was like, he was like, what do I do? And I was like, I don't fucking know what to tell you to do, because obviously that's
Sign this waiver, right?
yeah, shit. And let's put, like, maybe she really is into that, but what does that mean about her? And then I mean, your question was, to circle it back, do you think that can be okay? I mean, I think it's funny because it brings to mind like healthy version. Like if two people are meant to be and they have like complementary traumas, I almost can imagine,
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
like it's everybody's been through some shit, and maybe the shit you come up with, I love you all encompassingly, and my shit I come with, I love you all encompassing, and we find a place where we can, like, even with our shadow or trauma or bad elements of it, it can play in the mix of an ultimately overall healthy thing. I do believe in that.
Maybe ultimately heal. Maybe, yeah.
And I've been exposed to a lot of good scenarios where there's so much, I don't know, like, nobody's perfect. Everybody's been through some shit. The internet is so short-sighted in terms of good or bad, pure or whatever, healed or trauma, good parents or bad. Everybody has some shit, in my experience. So do I think that can happen? Yes. But of course, if we're going to speak of it from a practical level, do I think that shortens maybe the surface area? Yeah. But it's also, can it be like a risky thing to say? Like, there's also like it's, everything's on a spectrum in my brain. And there can be a little area of it where it's like, that's part of why we bonded, because we were able to transcend this thing that's a liability technically, and have it be an element in our dynamic, and it's like, and it works for us.
Right. And and I also think that it's a spectrum area in the sense that, if you get lost in passion, I think this is some of the reason on like maybe the more normal end of the hurt me girls, that like a guy is so aggressive, wants her so aggressively that she might be in a little bit of pain, but that's associated then with her being desired. And so it doesn't have that same sort of like negative implication. Like if you get really passionate, really aggressive sex, maybe there's like a bruise from being grabbed or something like that happens. What I wonder though, I consider that still in, I guess, normal range, maybe like far normal, but I still consider it in normal range. It's a lot of the stuff where it gets to be like really, really degrading, like punch me in the face kind of stuff, right? And
or if we can go there, like, I dated somebody who really
excuse me. Hey, Nelly.
What a funny thing to happen in this episode. That's daughters coming in.
I know, right?
I was about to say the most vulgar thing.
Yep.
Do you need to go address that for a second before
No.
Okay.
She's just wandering around.
That's
You want to say
so
hi to me?
funny. The
No, okay.
punchline. Oh my god. Now I feel weird saying this.
No. Say it. I'm glad I caught you right before you said it. You know what I mean? You could have almost said it.
Okay. I was gonna little first is like, okay, so if we're gonna say beyond the limits of normal sex, even just like aggressive, passionate sex, that I think I would also agree with you. Can be in the normal boundaries. Sorry, I just knocked my charger out. Anal. Dated somebody, was in love with him, great sex, whatever, long-term relationship. He always wanted to do that.
Yeah.
And whatever that implies about him or me, whatever. And I was like, no.
Yeah.
And it's interesting there because later in the like red pill Twitter sphere of learning through like being exposed to this masculine development stuff and kind of understanding a weird amount about the guy perspective. I remember, you start to learn about like, what porn degrading perspective of sex. And in hindsight, when we dated and I was younger, like, porn was like a normal thing guys did to me. And I still, if we're talking what's common, normal, if that's the definition of normal to you, then yeah. But once you enter the like self-development space and all these people in our corner who are talking about like porn really messing up guys, in hindsight, he loved porn, and he would openly talk about it. Yeah. And I was just like, whatever. Like I never thought of it as a liability. I never got jealous of him, like the idea of him jerking off and watching porn. But it's funny because in hindsight, thinking about that and all of these things that he would want to do that I didn't want to do, and like tried to be open to some of them and didn't work out. It's almost points to, and this is a risky term to use, but like a mutation.
Yes, yes, I agree with you completely. And I can tell you also how it works is it creates, and so it's initially just like, okay, you're seeing naked girls and then, okay, they're having sex. So everything starts kind of normal with the typical porn loop. But the algorithm starts to show you things that are more like shocking over time. And what happens is that it creates like an anxiety. And then that anxiety, there's a release that comes, right? You come, and it starts to create like an anxiety release circuit. And so in some ways, they start to get programmed to find sexually arousing things that are actually degrading and that are dealing with things that they want to avoid. Like you might ask yourself, like why is there like cuck porn, or like how do guys like watch tranny porn? Well, they didn't just like wake up one day and watch it. It keeps getting like programmed into them little by little over time. Anal is sort of on that spectrum, and you can see it's like a sales funnel. It's like, oh, you get them into anal, and then they're watching gay sex.
Okay. Right? Yeah. And I want to be clear that I'm not saying that's bad. Like I have a couple friends who have told me that they enjoy that.
Yeah.
Right. And they're married and whatever. So like, but what you're pointing to is interesting because you almost pointed to like, it's like a baseline tolerance of getting dirty or like, sexual. It like gets raised in this really manufactured way.
Yeah. I actually think, I really think that porn, this isn't like looking at naked pictures of women anymore. Like, I actually think this is, in some ways, it's like sexual abuse. I know that's like a really dramatic thing to say, but in terms of the after effect imprinting on people, I think it's like a low level, like abuse, that, because it does tend to manufacture preferences in a similar manner. And I bet you anything that 100 years ago, the only women who would have some sort of like kink at getting like punched in the face were probably women who were like prostitutes or something like that, if they were even able to still feel anything. I don't think this was, I don't think a lot of these things are normal, and I don't think that they are, I think that they've been programmed, like you said, a mutation. I really do believe that. And, a lot of the manosphere, and to be fair, a lot of younger women as well, who have also been exposed to porn and are also trying to adapt to the market of, you know, male preferences, I think have adopted a lot of this stuff. And I'm not sure that it was always the case. Like I said, like being dominant, sort of rough sex, yes, that's always been around. But this like extra degree, this extra gradient, it definitely seems programmed into. And there's certain things that from, you know, my years in the past when I looked at porn that got programmed into me too. And I know it. I'm like, and I know it because having been like completely away from the internet entirely for a year, it's like and I wasn't even like at that point in my life, like I probably looked at porn like a couple times a year, right? But at that point, like having like a full year of absolutely nothing, no like porn bot on Twitter, you know what I mean? It
Like
was like,
resensitized you to everything?
yeah, I could start to feel like there was some gradual, you know, rewiring that was occurring, you know?
Interesting.
It's just, I don't know. I do think the whole stuff is really interesting.
Circles all the way back to like, you know, another one of the maybe memes is like those schools of thought on the internet where people talk about sex where they the connotation of missionary is negative.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, oh my gosh, you can't just have like a piece. It's a stupid analogy, but I always make food analogies when I'm describing things. But it's like vanilla. Vanilla is a great flavor, or like just plain sourdough bread with butter, right? It's like if you have departed so far from where like you can never just have missionary sex and enjoy it, I think that implies that you know, you need a million different ingredients and flavors on the thing for it to be satisfying to you, when it can just be wholesome and also be enjoyable, and also without any like sauce or whatever it's called, you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's
which does point to the mutation point, like kind of point too, even though that's risky to say.
Yeah, but I think you have to call it like you see it. I mean, if you have a hard time finding like missionary enjoyable for like non-mechanical reasons, like I don't, you have to admit that there's something going on. You know, like, no, I can only have sex if like you fucking tie a belt around my neck. Oh, it's totally natural. You know, doesn't fucking make any sense.
Yeah.
You know, like we got to be more honest about this stuff. And so, you know, I wonder, because I'll just say this, that the women who've seemed the most like powerful and like self-empowered, let's put it that way, the most confident in themselves, tend to really want to have sex, but they want to be pleased. They want like pleasure, right? Like they want to enjoy themselves in the process because they're taking agency over their own pleasure,
I
right?
almost can't believe that we even have to say that out loud.
I know, but it's like
It's so sad. I hate the shame thing. Let's put like Madonna whore complex aside. And this shows up in social, just like tying back to like everybody should be capable of enjoying themselves. And the fact that things have gotten so skewed to where we struggle with this socially, we struggle with this in our vocations, we struggle with this in the bedroom. Like, it's so sad.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is.
It's both the virgin or the whore, right? She can't really enjoy herself because she's using this as validation, as a tool. And then the virgin's like so much shame that she can't, you know, relax. And then that like takes away from the sexual experience too, because right, even in the pure dynamic, then that can also be something that infringes on it. Say it's like no whore issues, no body, whatever those things are implied in that whole domain, no mutations, whatever. That can also be something that gets in the way for a man, right? Because she can't feel comfortable and like enjoy herself or like respond naturally. And let's be real, part of enjoying sex is like you feel like both of you are having a good experience and are, you know.
Yeah, in Ayala's graph, the very, very highest mutual point of thing of like, you know, what you want the other person, or what turns you on, was the other person being turned on. So it's
That
like,
makes so much sense to me.
it makes so much sense, right? So, well, there's actually more topics that, you know, I would have loved to go into, but I think we'll save those for another chat. We're at 140 now. Do you have anything else you really felt like you wanted to? This one like breezed right by.
Yeah, that was great. I didn't realize. Yeah. I don't know. I don't think so. I think we talking about no, not really.
Well, we'll pick up the next one next couple weeks. And if you guys, by the way, in the chat, let me just check the chat. Let me show some love to the chat.
Yeah, how many? We have the last time we had like 1,000 something viewers for the whole time.
Yes, I am. I need to do a better job of.
I've totally just given up on. I'm like whatever I wanted to do and have these public conversations with, like through your thing, is just having some.
Oh, wait a minute. Is this from? Is this? What the fuck? It's crazy and wild in here.
Oh God. Is there a chat that people are like going off?
Yeah.
I want to see. Where is it?
It doesn't matter.
Oh no.
Anyway.
Well,
all right, guys. I'm not gonna repeat.
Am I gonna know about this, or am I gonna be able to see it after? You're turning red.
Yeah, we'll move on here.
Oh man. Okay.
All right, guys. Thank you for joining the Fat Stedman podcast with Trina Nuance, and we'll see you next time. I love you guys. Love you all.